Okay, so we are looking at chapter 8 of the book, and the chapter talks about fraud and errors. Now, the book lists 5 learning objectives, and my advice to you is that you should go through these learning objectives before you go through the chapter. Then go through the chapter, and at the end, come back and look at the objectives and try to convince yourself that you have, in fact, been able to achieve these objectives. So the first objective there, to explain the threats faced by modern information systems. And these are many, and they are the sort of things that, if you are not careful, could ultimately lead to your company collapsing. And then number 2 talks about being able to define fraud. Number 3 discuss who actually perpetrates frauds. Number 3, define now computer fraud. So first be able to define fraud, but then also be able now to narrow it down to computer fraud and be able to understand what makes it different from fraud generally defined. And finally, explain how to prevent and detect computer fraud and abuse. So do ensure that you have been able to achieve all of these 5 objectives. Now, in terms of the threats to account information systems, the book identifies 4 main types. Number 1, natural and political disasters. Here you're talking, of course, about things like fires and floods and earthquakes, which potentially could disrupt not just your account information systems, not just your the functions of your company, but perhaps the entire city or within which your company exists. So some of you will be aware of the recent earthquakes that hit Turkey and Syria, and those were major earthquakes that caused huge amounts of disruption, loss of lives, buildings collapsing. And you can imagine that if your company um, is in an area that is hit by an earthquake of that magnitude, and everything collapses, your buildings collapse, and your hardware, your computers, your servers are damaged. And if you imagine that in that context, perhaps you do not have any kind of backup, then that would mean that as a company, you ultimately now you have no records at all of who owes you or who you owe. And in that situation, it would mean that you really cannot continue as a company, continue to exist. You collapse, you go out of business. And so always you need to be thinking about that. And you need to ensure that, yes, you have backups, but also that your backups are kept off-site. Usually, off-site, people may be thinking, okay, I will keep the backups in a different part of the city. But with an earthquake, it may be that the entire city is affected, and therefore your original data, your original systems, and your backup data, backup systems, all of that are destroyed by the same natural disaster, by the same earthquake or the same fire. So you need to think carefully about where you keep your backups. Of course, nowadays, with things like vCloud, it may be that you are able, in fact, to keep your backups perhaps even on a different continent, so that when you are hit by a natural disaster, your backups will survive. But of course, an important part of any information system is the humans that actually run these systems. And so it may be it may be that in the end, because of the loss of lives of your critical employees, you will still suffer anyway. In any case, natural and political disasters, you're talking about fires, you're talking about floods, you're talking about earthquakes, hurricanes, wars, terrorist attacks, and things like that. These are things that as a company you really have no control over. And sometimes you may not even be able to predict them. Sometimes you are in an area where you've never that area has never experienced any floods, any earthquakes, never experienced any terrorist attacks. And so when something like that happens out of the blue, it is going to catch you perhaps completely unprepared. Because also trying to prepare for something like that perhaps will never happen may mean that you are incurring costs that you are not particularly willing to incur. If you are in an area that has never been hit by an earthquake, then maybe the amount of money that you need to invest preparing for an earthquake may be so much that you wonder whether it is worth it, given that an earthquake has never hit that particular area. And therefore, that may mean that you don't prepare. And so when the earthquake out of the blue hits you, then you are totally and absolutely unprepared. Under natural and political disasters, we also have electronic warfare. And the book, as part of what it calls Focus 8.1, talks about an interesting case where the president of a country actually authorized an attack, electronic warfare, on another country. So warfare now is not just about guns and bombs, and it's also electronic. And in this particular case, when that happened, the other country also then was able to hit back. So things like that actually happen. Now, the second threat, software errors and equipment malfunctions. Well, equipment will malfunction, hardware will malfunction, operating systems will crash, software will have errors. When people are developing software, they are never able to come to a point where they can say, our software does not contain bugs at all. They may be able to say, we have gone through the software, we have not been able to identify any further bugs. We went through, we debugged, we killed all the bugs, and now we are at a point where even when you go through, we are not able to identify any new bugs. But that is not saying that the software is free of bugs. The fact that you are not able to detect errors does not mean that the software now is free of errors. It may be that, yes, you are not able to detect it, but then you deliver it to your client, and when the client runs the software, now that bug actually does show itself. So as a company, you are buying software from other people, you are buying operating systems, maybe from Microsoft, maybe you are using Linux, you are buying database management systems, maybe it's Oracle, maybe it's whatever it is, and you are buying the accounting package itself. So there are different layers. First, you have the hardware. On top of the hardware, you have your operating systems, and then you have your database management systems, and then you have your account. So at each layer, the possibility of failure exists. The hardware may fail, the operating system may crash, the relational database management system may. So at each layer, there's always that possibility that something may fail, or the failure may in fact not even be one that can be blamed upon you as a company. Maybe it's your power utility that is having challenges, and so there's a power outage, or maybe the power fluctuates. If you remember from your primary school how alternating current works, if the fluctuate, if there's a spike, that might mean that your hardware is damaged, especially in cases where maybe you don't even have UPSs that help to smoothen the power supply. So when that happens, it may mean that your hardware is damaged, and sometimes the damage is clear. The system fails, but sometimes there's a maybe some kind of damage on the hard drive that you are not able to detect, but it means that the data perhaps now can no longer be trusted, the data on the hard drive. Or it may be that there are errors during transmission. Perhaps your clients are logging in from across the city or across the continent or across the world. It may be that you have servers that are communicating, that are transmitting data in between them. And during transmission, there's always the possibility of error. For instance, if there's thunder and lightning, that lightning might actually induce errors. So potentially there will be transmission errors because of lightning, or maybe there's heavy equipment next to your data transmission lines that also potentially could induce errors. And the danger always is that you may not be able to detect these errors, and so you naively are working with data that in fact has been corrupted, that has been changed, that is no longer what it used to be, but you are not aware of this, and you are basing your important decisions on this. So that is always the danger. Bullet number 3, unintentional acts. This will be accidents, innocent errors, omissions, typically that are due to the staff, your employees. An accident may, an innocent error, for instance, may be something quite as simple as a transposition error, where an employee capturing data or data entry clerk wants to enter 94, and then they transpose those TDs, and so they enter 49. And that is an error that might go unnoticed, and yet it may have serious repercussions down the line. So some of the errors, of course, are accidents. Some are just due to human carelessness, particularly when people are entering data and they've been doing that for a long time, manually capturing data. They begin to become tired, and the chances now of error will actually increase. This is why, wherever possible, you want to use electronic equipment to do your data collection. For instance, in a supermarket, the reason that you are using a barcode scanner is because when you capture data that way, rather than a human trying to copy things from the source document into another document, capturing with barcode scanner reduces the number of potential errors. Carelessness might be that employees lose or misplace files. And sometimes the file that is misplaced contains important confidential information, but ultimately the file falls into the wrong hands. And one thing also that might fall under carelessness is the way that employees dispose of used information, of used reports, for instance, that they think they don't need anymore. Maybe they simply throw them into the rubbish bin. And somebody who potentially may be monitoring your site would be able to pick up the reports and read whatever confidential information is on that report. So you as a company, you need to ensure that your employees are properly trained. They appreciate the importance of correctly capturing data. They appreciate also the importance of properly disposing of things like all reports or report that perhaps contained an error and you're throwing it away. Um, Care always must be exercised. Ideally, you need to be shredding reports like that to ensure that even if that garbage ultimately falls into the wrong hands, it will be difficult, hopefully impossible, for that particular individual to reconstruct the original reports. Sometimes, of course, people intentionally, we're looking now at word number 4, intentional acts, intentionally do things. They intentionally sabotage you as a company. Maybe you are talking about an employee who is disgruntled. Perhaps he or she felt that they ought to have been promoted, but somebody else was promoted in their place. Maybe in doing so, the company was right. The employee that ultimately got the promotion perhaps was more deserving. But if the employee that did not get the promotion has this feeling that this belief, they are convinced, they have this conviction that they deserved it more. Maybe they are just thinking, I've been here longer. They are not thinking in terms of actual job performance. So they feel disgruntled. Then they could do things to sabotage the company. Of course, sometimes it is just good old fraud, crime, theft, people stealing from their employers. Later on, we talk a little bit more about computer crime and fraud. But this issue of sabotage is actually quite important. It's something that as a company you would need to think about very, very carefully. Crime in terms of cyber theft, your book suggests that more than $1 trillion worth of intellectual property is being stolen annually from businesses around the world. So this may be, imagine for instance, a company that designs and manufactures cars, that employees may be stealing these designs and selling them to the competition. So they make money that way. So these are things that, but also when you're talking about account information systems, there will be a lot of data in there that is very sensitive. Some people may be stealing it to sell it, for instance, to newspapers. So again, you need to think carefully about how you ensure that you protect yourself against some of these activities. Now, talking about fraud here, we are talking about any means that a person might use to gain unfair advantage over another person. And fraud, you are talking about what is called white collar crime. And here is how it is defined. I would encourage you to go to this link and actually read the entire web page. But white collar crime, you are talking about non-violent crime generally. That includes things like public corruption, healthcare frauds. So you are not talking about somebody attacking you with a knife or a gun and taking away your money or your wallet or your cell phone, your camera. So generally, there is no violence. And yet, usually, the amount that is actually stolen from individuals, from companies, from governments will be quite substantial. Somebody might actually completely empty your account. Somebody might steal millions from a particular company. And of course, that sort of thing might mean that ultimately the company is not able to survive. The company collapses, or even if it doesn't collapse directly because of the amount that has been stolen, there's always the issue of reputational risk. If you are a website that people visit, for instance, to buy stuff, maybe they're buying computers, maybe they're buying phones, maybe they're buying books or shoes, whatever. What that means is that typically they log into the website, and then they enter information about, for instance, their credit cards, so that they proceed to buy from you. And if that data then falls into the wrong hands, it means that your customers will be losing tons and tons of money. And so if it comes out that you are running a website that frequently has these challenges, then your reputation will be damaged, maybe beyond repair. People will actually be afraid now to buy, even if the products that you are selling are particularly good, high quality, your customers actually want them, but they fear that the information that they provide on your website will not be properly taken care of, would be enough to push away your customers. In any case, for an act to be fraudulent, here are the requirements. So number one, a false statement, representation, or disclosure. Imagine, for instance, maybe you have a position that requires, say, a master's degree in accounting. So a false representation or statement or disclosure in this case might be somebody applying for that position, providing you with a certificate that they have a master's degree when in fact they don't. Number two, a material fact which induces a victim to act. So acting here would be actually employing that particular individual. So given this certificate, if the HR officer, for instance, is convinced that this certificate is in fact real, then they act, they give the individual the job. Number three, an intent to deceive. This applicant is giving you this certificate, knowing very well that they don't have a master's degree, and they're doing this with the intent to deceive you into giving them a job that they in fact do not qualify for. And the victim, in this case, let's imagine the victim is the HR officer, relies on this misrepresentation. They act because they are convinced that this is true, so they relied on that misrepresentation. And of course, there's injury or loss suffered by the victim. If you are employing somebody who is underqualified, then of course there's going to be down the line some losses for you as a company. So for the act to be considered fraudulent, these are the 5 points that people typically will be looking at. That's, the perpetrator provided a false statement, representation, or disclosure, which induced the victim to act. And in providing that statement, representation, or disclosure that was false, and providing it knowing that it is in fact false, they were doing so with an intent to deceive. And the victim relied on the misrepresentation, and ultimately there's a loss or injury suffered by the victim. The two main categories of fraud then are misappropriation of assets and fraudulent financial reporting. So misappropriation of assets, we are talking here about thefts of company assets, which may include physical assets. So people may be stealing cash, or they may be stealing inventory, they may be stealing computers, they may be stealing um, chairs. They may, so they may be stealing physical assets, but also they may be stealing digital assets. I talked earlier, for instance, about people who may be stealing customer data that they then sell either to the competition or to newspapers or to politicians or to so that somehow they are making money that way. And in terms of the misappropriation of assets, an important contributor here is going to be the absence of controls. If there are no controls, then you are leading people into temptation, and also once they are tempted and they start being mischievous, you are not going to be able to detect um, that somebody has been mischievous, and that of course then says to this person that they can continue to do it because that there are no controls, there's nothing to stop them, and once they've done it, there's nothing that will identify them as having been the mischievous one. Number two, the fraudulent financial reporting. This is cooking of the books, and if you go to, say, Google and search a little bit, you will notice that there have been cases where huge amounts of money were perhaps stolen from investors, stolen from companies, um, through this approach, where sometimes it's management that is actually cooking the books. Um, talking about fictitious revenue, overstating assets. Sometimes you have ghost employees that don't really exist, but they are on the payroll and they are being paid. And the intention here would be to deceive investors and creditors. So this is why I was saying it might even be management doing this, because when they do this, they are trying to convince investors to keep investing into the company, even though the company is not doing well. Sometimes the company doesn't even have a product, but management, um, cooks the books, and that seems to say that they have a product, it's working, and investors and keep pumping money into the company. Sometimes people do these things to increase the company stock price. Maybe you put the price of the stock up, and while it is up, you sell it, you make tons and tons of money, and the person that bought the stock now is left holding the stock of a company that actually is a complete failure. And of course, sometimes people do these things to hide company losses or problems. So these are the two main types of two main categories of fraud: misappropriation of assets and fraudulent financial reporting. Usually, of course, as a company, you will have auditors, um, internal auditors, but also external auditors. And the responsibilities of the auditors: understand fraud, discuss the risks, obtain. So these are okay, fine. These are the responsibilities. But the key thing to understand is that even when you have auditors, that does not guarantee that fraud will be detected. People will perpetrate fraud, and sometimes your auditors will not be able to detect that fraud. In fact, somewhere in the book, it mentions that usually when fraud is detected, it is not so much because of the auditors, but it is because of a whistleblower. Somebody, some employee maybe calls anonymously and says, oh, by the way, there's an issue here. So that person is not an auditor, is an employee who has been able to detect that maybe her colleagues are doing all sorts of things that are unethical, and therefore they feel challenged to report this to the company. So you may want, as a company, to ensure that you have ways of encouraging and protecting whistleblowing. When somebody says there's an issue, you want to ensure that you protect them, because people don't want the perpetrators to know who reported them. So you want to ensure that your whistleblowers are protected. Of course, sometimes it may be that the authors themselves are in collusion, for instance, with management. If management is in collusion with the auditors know, management also knows, but they are working together, and so together they will conceal the fraud. That also is a serious possibility. Now, in terms of who perpetrates fraud and why, well, if we were talking about blue collar crime, we're talking about violent criminals, somebody who attacks you with a gun or with a hammer or with a knife, then maybe in general, somebody like that might be psychologically different from ordinary members of the public. But when we are talking about white collar crime, it turns out that actually there is no significant psychological or demographic difference between such criminals and ordinary members of the public. And what this is saying is that you can't just look at people and say, I know. Even in terms of their behavior, even if there's somebody that you work with, that you talk to every day, that you may still not be able to detect that this person actually behind the scenes is stealing from the company, because there's no difference between there's no us and them. We are all quite the same. But sometimes a good person like that may turn to fraud, perhaps because they are disgruntled and unhappy. So you employed a trusted, hardworking person, but maybe somewhere along the line, because of the way that the company treated this individual, they started feeling, disgruntled and unhappy and perhaps even angry towards the company. And so that may be the thing that pushes this good person into becoming this terrible person. Of course, sometimes they are disgruntled and happy. They are convinced that they have good reasons not to be disgruntled and happy, but maybe actually they are misguided. But either way, when they start sabotaging the company, when they start stealing from the company, the damage will be substantial anyway. In terms of age, well, maybe that is the one demographic that may distinguish, computer fraudsters from other employees. That typically they are younger and they possess sophisticated IT skills. Some of them actually will be completely self-taught. It may be a kid who has been playing with computers since they were 6. So over time, they have learned all these skills. Maybe they have the skills, but in terms of issues of ethics, they are not mature in that direction, but they possess these skills, and they do things maybe just to find out whether they can hack into your company. And of course, once they're inside and they have access to all that money, then the temptation to steal will may in the end be difficult to resist. And usually, when somebody does commit computer fraud and they are not caught, then the tendency is that they will move on to bigger things. Initially, they may have stolen a little bit of money, and then they are not caught, so there are no consequences. And that says to them, actually, you can continue. And when they continue, now they up the stakes. Now they are stealing larger amounts of money. Now they are causing more, in terms of the damage that they cause to the company. And perhaps they even become serial offenders that never stop. They are always offending. And this is sometimes, due to the fact that companies worry about reputational risk. So when somebody steals from them, say for instance you are a bank and an employee steals money, then the bank may not necessarily want the public to know about this particular scandal. And so to keep things quiet, then they will not be taking action against this particular employee, at least not action that the public will become aware of. So they may simply be saying, we are dismissing the employee, so they quietly dismiss the employee. Or once the employee realizes that they've been caught, they may simply say, I'm resigning, and resign. And the company now may be thinking, well, he's gone. If we prosecute him, the amount of noise, the reputational risk in the long term, what is going to happen? And so they let him go. So in that case, then when that person moves to the next company, then that company is not aware of this person's history. So again, they employ him, and he does the same thing, and he lives under similar circumstances. So he keeps moving from company to company, stealing, and each of these companies doesn't want to take action that might damage their own reputation, and that works now in this offender's favor, because now he will continue to steal and there are no repercussions. So as a company, you need to think about these things, that when you let a person go that way scot-free, you are in fact creating problems for somebody downstream. And perhaps the reason this person is here stealing from you is because upstream somebody let him go scot-free. And talking about malicious software, this is big business. People create malicious software deliberately, sometimes to steal, sometimes just to destroy and sabotage. Earlier, we were talking about electronic warfare. So in that case, you may be creating malicious software to sabotage the country that you are targeting. But if you are a hacker, maybe a team of hackers, then typically it may be that you are creating malicious software that will help you to steal money from your victims, maybe from banks, maybe from individuals. So you actually create the software deliberately and use it. We talk a little bit more about malicious software in this chapter a little bit later, but it is big business, and it's a huge challenge for individual members of the public, but also for companies and even for governments. Governments also are being attacked, by hackers. Now, let's talk about what is called the fraud triangle. These are the three conditions that typically should all exist in order for somebody to actually commit fraud. So these are the things that we may say, this is what will push people into committing fraud. And these are pressure, opportunity, and rationalizations. Now, pressure may be financial, lifestyle, or emotional. Financial may mean that the individual employee, for instance, made some investments that turned out to be bad, investment that turned out to be bad. They lost a lot of money, and maybe now they are broke. Or they somehow incurred heavy financial losses. You can imagine, for instance, an employee whose house is cut down by fire. Everything is destroyed, the house and everything inside the house, but perhaps this house had not been insured. So the employee suffers a very heavy financial loss. Now, that may be something that might pressure them into thinking about committing fraud. Another, of course, lifestyle. Some employees maybe develop gambling habits, or maybe they have some kind of addiction. It may be drug, it may be alcohol, it may be whatever it is, and that addiction demands money time and time again. If it's a drug addiction, for instance, the employee needs to be buying drugs time and time again. And ultimately, the salary is not enough. Maybe they sell whatever they have in the house. That is not enough. So now they start thinking now about stealing from the company. Of course, sometimes it's, excuse me, emotional. It may be just greed. It may be also under emotional job dissatisfaction. They are not happy with their job. Or maybe they are being coerced by bosses. Maybe it's the boss who wants to steal, and they're forcing the subordinates to become part of this scheme, threatening the subordinate that if they don't take part in the scheme, then they would fire them. So the subordinate might lose their job for refusing to take part in a scheme that is defrauding the company. So these are some of the things that might exert pressure on employees, pushing them towards perpetrating fraud. Now, for higher level employees, for management, there may be other things. For instance, industry conditions. If there's a decline in the industry, and now your profits are going down, if there are significant tax changes, and the management now thinks, now we have to pay so much more in terms of tax, and they may of course be conflict. Excuse me. They may of course be conflicted that when the profits go down or the taxes go up, now that is going to eat into the benefits that have been accruing towards management. So now their packages are going down, and so because of that, they may want to cook the books and ensure that it looks like the company is doing well, and so they get paid high bonuses when in fact the company is not doing well. Sometimes management, looking at management characteristics, they make the mistake of making forecasts that suggest that the company will do exceedingly well. The forecasts are aggressive, and then reality hits, and the company is not able to reach those targets. Now, management is under pressure because now it would mean that management is failing. So rather than accept that, they goofed, they cooked the books to make it appear as if they are in fact making the profits that they said they would be making. So those are some, or things like, impending business failure, so those are the things that may force employees at management level to commit fraud. So these are unlikely to affect lower level employees, but these are the most likely to be active when you are talking about management level employees. So that was the first condition, pressure, that there should be some kind of pressure on the individual to commit fraud. Now, if there's that pressure, what is the second condition? Well, opportunity. They are under pressure, they are thinking about it, they want to do it. Do they have the chance, the opportunity to do it? So we are now talking about a situation that allows the perpetrator to do these things, to actually commit the fraud. For instance, if there are no controls, then it may be easy for the person to steal, to commit that fraud. But the second thing now is that they should also be able to conceal the fraud. So you commit it, but are you able to conceal it? If yes, you can commit it, but you can't conceal it, then chances are that you will walk away, because you can see that, yes, I can do it, but once I've done it, I will be caught. And nobody wants to be caught. and if you can commit it and you can conceal it, can you convert that particular theft or misrepresentation into personal gain? So yes, you are cooking the books, but in the end, how does that benefit you personally? Is the money actually going into your pocket? If the answer is no, then what is the point of cooking the books? But if the answer is yes, then yes, you have the chance, you are able to conceal, somehow cooking the books to conceal, and then in the end, the money goes into your pocket. So there is an element of personal gain. So if these three elements are present, then the opportunity now is alive for the employee to commit fraud. And many opportunities, of course, are just they are the result of deficient systems of internal controls. And here, when we say controls, you're talking about things like separation of duties. Somebody initiates and another individual approves. So you separate the duties. If the individual who initiates also approves, then you are making it easier for that individual to commit fraud. But if you separate the duties, then typically it becomes a little bit more difficult now for two people to collude. If there's one person, then that person knows that, at least in their mind, they know that I'm the only one who knows this, and therefore, if I don't tell anybody, I will not be caught. But if there's a second person now in the picture, or perhaps even a third person now in the picture, it becomes a lot more difficult now to commit fraud. So we've talked about the first condition for fraud, which is pressure. The second condition, which is opportunity, and now the third, to complete the triangle, is rationalization. And this is what allows perpetrators to justify their behavior. So the employee now is able to rationalize away their personal integrity. Maybe he's able to say, I'm only taking what they owe me. They should have promoted me, so this man should have come to me. Now I'm taking it; it belongs to me. So they are rationalizing away their integrity, or they may say, well, I'm just borrowing it. I will return it later. But if they borrow it, as they think they're doing, and they don't get caught, then chances are they will borrow more and continue borrowing. So in this case, what then is the distinction between borrowing and stealing? Even if you take it and return it later, you actually stole it. You took it without permission and without knowledge. So you can't say it was a loan. The company did not give you a loan. You stole the money from the company. Or the employee might say, well, no one will ever know, especially where there are no separation of duties. I'm the only one who is involved here. I initiate and I approve. No one will ever know. So that is one way of rationalizing away one's personal integrity. Sometimes they will say it was for a good cause. So maybe the employee is stealing the money because they need the money for a family member who is sick, who does not have the money to carry all those medical bills. Maybe it's a something like cancer that requires treatment that in the end may cost huge sums of money. So now the employee is saying, well, I can't let my mother go through this on her own. It's a good cause, so I'm taking the money for a good cause. And maybe combine that with borrowing. I'm borrowing it for a good cause. Or maybe combine it with the first one, taking what they owe me. If they had promoted me, I would be able to pay for my mother's medical bills. They didn't promote me. They skipped me. They took somebody from underneath me and promoted them. So it's okay for me to do this. So they are rationalizing it away. So the three corners of the fraud triangle: pressure. In that last example, the illness would be something that pressurizes the employee, and opportunity to commit fraud, conceal it, and also then convert whatever you took into personal gain. And finally, the ability to rationalize away your personal integrity. So if these three are present, pressures, opportunity, and rationalization, then chances of the employee actually committing the fraud are quite high. So this kind of gives you an idea of what you might have to do to try to prevent fraud, to ensure that fraud does not happen in the first place. The obvious one would be to take away the opportunity. And how do you do that? Well, through robust controls. Now, computer fraud, here we are talking about cases where a computer is actually used to commit fraud. So it's a tool that the employee or somebody else from, I keep saying the employee, but remember it may be somebody from outside the company is using to commit fraud, perhaps to alter or falsify inputs. Which is one of the simplest and most common ways to commit fraud. There's an interesting example in the book that talks about somebody who goes to a bank, places blank deposits there that are similar to those available in the in the bank lobby. People use this to deposit money, but actually they are depositing money into the perpetrator's account. The problem with this may be, at least from the point of view of the perpetrator, that it may be quite easy for the perpetrator to be caught. Usually, perpetrators really want to leave no tracks whatsoever behind. And nowadays, particularly, talking about computer fraud, there are sophisticated ways in which people do that, and we'll talk about some of them a little bit later. So that was the first category, talking about classification of computer fraud. The second, that talks about the processor, where, remember, in a computer, when you enter data into a computer and you run things, analysis, that means now that you are running things on a processor. And sometimes you are actually charging people for using your processor. So you are providing computer time for hire. People come to you and say, I have a job to run. Maybe you have a supercomputer. People need to use a supercomputer. They can't afford to have a supercomputer of their own because these things are expensive, costing in the millions, perhaps even. And so they come to you and they say, I have a job that I want to run on, and you charge them maybe per hour or whatever it is. Somebody may find ways of actually being able to run their program on your machines without you knowing, without you therefore being able to charge them. So in fact, they are stealing computer time and services from you. So that's an example under this category. Another example from the book: running an illegal gambling websites using company resources. Imagine, for instance, an employee maybe with her friends who are not employees of this particular company. They set up an illegal, gambling website, and they run it on your machines. Maybe this employee is one of your IT people, is your web experts. So they set up a website on your machines, on your servers, that they use to do something that is even illegal. So not only are they stealing company resources, processors, and also the time that this person is using during working time to look after their own illegal gambling website, they are doing something that is illegal that could in the end get you into all sorts of challenges. Or they may even be doing child pornography on your machines. And when things like that like this come out, then even in terms of the reputational risk to yourself, the damage will be quite extensive. So that is the second category. Number three, computer instruction. Remember, when you are running any program, whether it's Windows or it's Word or whatever it is, essentially you are running instructions on a processor, and the perpetrator may actually create instructions that carry out unauthorized activity, maybe instructions that steal money from the account. Say you are a bank, you have 10 million customers, and the employee might write a simple program that steals a little bit of money from each account so that the customers themselves don't notice. But when you combine, say for instance, they're stealing one puller from each account, and there are 10 million accounts, then it means that a month they're stealing 10 million puller, and that is quite substantial. Data, illegally using, copying, browsing, searching, harming company data. So maybe the employee or somebody else from outside is getting access to information that ideally they should not be getting access to. they are learning things about your customers that they should not be learning. Or maybe they are stealing data, they're copying it and selling it. Or maybe they are actually modifying it. So those would fall under category number 4 that talks about data. And in here, as the book says, the perpetrators are most likely to be employees. So it may be employees who are stealing data and selling it, as you said, to the competition or to newspapers or to whoever. But sometimes, again, as you said, it's just employee negligence. So training also is quite important. Training in terms of the implications of some of these things, but also in terms of ethics, that people should be trained to appreciate the difference between right and wrong. And number 5 talks about output, and there's an interesting discussion in your book that talks about how monitors emit signals that can be displayed on a TV screen, perhaps even a couple of miles away. 2 miles, a mile is what, 1.6 kilometers, so you're talking about more than 3 kilometers away. So your perpetrators will have equipment that allows them to do all sorts of things. Nowadays, your hackers, they are sophisticated individuals that possess high levels of skills, that have access to all sorts of tools that allow them to do things that you may not even have thought possible. So that would, or maybe they forge paychecks, although maybe nowadays checks are going more and more out of fashion. Okay, so I've been talking about fraud. Now let's talk about preventing and detecting it. So ideally, you want to prevent it. You don't want fraud to happen. But in cases where it does actually happen, you want minimally to be able to detect it so that you can take action. Maybe to ensure that it does not happen, maybe to recover, if possible, what has been stolen from you. So there are various ways in which you can do this. One would be to create a culture of integrity where people themselves frown upon fraud, where they choose not to do fraud because they know and they believe that it is wrong to do these things, and they don't want to be associated with that kind of behavior. But also, we're talking about now, but also adopt a structure that minimizes fraud. So we're talking about issues now of corporate governance. So you want to have a board that is independent, that is strong, not a board that is controlled by, for instance, the chief executive who is supposed to be reporting to the board. So the board must be strong and it must be independent. Supervision is also one of those things that can really help with preventing fraud. Things like now talking about on the side of systems. So here we're talking on the side of the organization, but on the side of systems, implement change management controls. When somebody goes into the system and changes something, why are they changing it? Do we have a record of who changed what? Can we trace back things and say we ended up with this figure? How did we arrive here? And trace it back all the way to the source document. If a lecturer, for instance, can simply go into the system and start changing marks, is that proper? So these are the things that you need to be thinking about. We've talked about strong internal controls. We talked about segregating accounting functions, but also make sure that you use properly designed forms. You want, for instance, forms that make it difficult for people to make silly mistakes. So even if it is unintentional, you need to be able to catch it. For instance, if a lecturer is entering marks, and the mark they're entering says the student got 120%, how is that possible? So your system should be able to say, no, that number is outside the range, the permitted range for that particular thing. Require independent checks and reconciliation of data. In terms of the systems now, restrict access. You can't let every employee have access to all parts of the system. Need to know basis. Why are they given access to this particular part of the system? Because they actually do need to have that access. So restrict access. System authentication, implement computer controls, use encryption, fix software bugs. Earlier we talked about bugs. That you as a developer, you can never guarantee the absence of bugs, the absence of errors. And so if there are errors in your software, then hackers out there become aware of it, and they know how to take advantage of those errors. And usually the supplier will release patches that plug those holes. If you don't keep your software up to date, then it may be that there's a hole that was discovered. The supplier produced a patch to plug that hole. You did not install that patch, and therefore you are vulnerable. Now the entire world is aware that if you haven't installed this particular patch, then you are vulnerable, and therefore hackers, for instance, may be able to enter into a system through that hole that you could quite easily have plugged, but did not, because you don't keep your software up to date. So fix software bugs and update systems regularly. Destroy hard drives when disposing of computers. This is similar to what we were talking about earlier, that when you have hard copies that you throw away without shredding, somebody may actually be able to retrieve sensitive information from those reports. The same is true of hard drives. If you simply throw them away, somebody may in fact be able to retrieve information from. You may think, I have deleted, but actually, usually it is possible to recover data from a hard drive even after the user has run a delete command. Because typically, delete command simply marks that particular part of the hard drive as having been deleted. So it doesn't necessarily delete the information, it simply marks it so that the next time the system wants to save, it is free to save on that particular. But if it never, so when it saves, it overrides. But if it never saves, then even though you deleted it, it can still be recovered. Unless if you use a special software that really allows you to permanently delete things from disk. So these are things that you need to think about, that yes, we are throwing away this hard drive, we don't need it anymore. But in doing so, are we not also throwing away confidential information that somebody out there may be able to extract and use, perhaps even against us. So you want to make it difficult to commit fraud. So in the previous slide, in this slide, we are saying make it less likely, make it difficult now to commit fraud. So if you have destroyed, then people cannot be extracting things from your hard disk. And also improve detection. Yes, you may not be able to completely prevent fraud, but try to ensure that when it happens, you will be able to detect it. We talked about whistleblowers earlier, so have a fraud hotline of some sort. Make sure that whoever calls is guaranteed anonymity. They are protected, and they are not going to be punishing them in any way. So people must feel free that they can, in fact, report fraud. Take the time to assess fraud risks. Sometimes companies will employ will do what is called penetration testing, where maybe you employ hackers, the good ones. There are good hackers and there are bad hackers. You employ good hackers to try and hack into your system to see whether they would be able to do that. So in a sense, that is an audit of some sort, where if the hacker is able to get in, then they will be saying to you, well, here is where you are vulnerable. Here is where we are able to get in, and so you can then beef up your security in that particular area. In terms of systems also, you need to have audit trails. We were saying earlier that for every figure, you need to be able to trace it back all the way to the source document. So that is an audit trail. How did we ultimately arrive at this figure? You need to be able to trace it and say, okay, ultimately here is the source document. Here is where it originates. And all along the way, be able to say who did what, so that ultimately we ended up with this particular figure. Of course, install fraud detection software and monitor system activities. Check who is trying to access things that perhaps they don't have access to. So it is not enough to ensure that I don't have access to a particular part of the system. You also need to monitor me. If I keep trying to access parts of the system that I shouldn't be accessing, then that might be a signal that I'm actually trying to commit some kind of fraud. I'm trying to hack now into the system. But also you want to monitor, because there may be attempts from outside, hackers trying to break into your system. So you need to be monitoring for that as well. If you are not, then it would mean that a hacker from outside maybe takes 6 months every day trying to hack into your system, and you are not aware of that, and therefore you do not take any action that would ensure that you are properly protected. So you need to monitor system activities. Looking at whether people are trying to hack into a system, that is called intrusion detection. Okay, and think about ways to reduce fraud losses. So you are talking about things like insurance. We've talked about disasters earlier. You need to have a disaster recovery plan. You need to have backup copies that you keep away from the originals, so that if the originals are destroyed, then the copies still exist. You need to think carefully about how far away. Certainly not in the same room, because if the room burns down, then the originals and the backups are all destroyed. So you need to think carefully about, and also ensure that wherever they are, those backup copies, they are actually very safe. And also the way in which you transport the backup from the main site to the backup site. Ensure that in between, during transmission, maybe it's a memory stick that you are working with, that as you walk across the other side, you have it in your pocket. Maybe somebody knows that you are doing that and they will attack you and steal the stick from you. Maybe you are using transmission lines, cables, but maybe somebody listens. They snoop, they listen to the data as it flows along the transmission lines. So not only are you trying to ensure that you have your backups on a different site, but also you want to ensure that they are protected wherever they are, and that in transmitting the data from the main site to the backup site, that communication channel, whatever form it may take, is actually protected. You have heard, I believe, about data analytics, data science, machine learning. Here, essentially what we are saying is that you can, in fact, use sophisticated techniques, statistical techniques, for instance, to analyze your data, and that way be able to prevent and detect fraud. For instance, you may be able to detect when your customer, if you are a bank, I'm thinking a bank, your customer, they keep buying, and so you know their buying patterns. And so when somebody steals their credit card and now they do something out of the ordinary, you are now able to say, no, this can't be. Potentially, this means that the card has been stolen. Typically, this particular client does not have these kind of buying patterns. Why suddenly are we seeing this new thing? So that way, you may be able to now to contact the owner of the credit card and say to them, do you have your card? Has it been stolen? So you may be able to do that even before the holder of the card realizes that the card has been stolen. So you may be able to take action timely to ensure that the losses are minimized. So when you are doing analytics, we are not saying that these techniques are so sophisticated that they can do everything on their own, that they can directly detect fraud. We are really talking about decision support systems. We are talking about tools that can aid the decision-making process. Okay, I think let's stop here. I believe have done justice to this chapter, but I do encourage you to go through the chapter carefully on your own. But okay, let's stop here. Now, issues of copyright, as always, please do not circulate. We are talking about fraud and ethics and things like that, and you don't want now to be perpetrating fraud. Thank you.